Hey, welcome back to Hidden Family Infidelity and Revenge. And today's story is one of the longest, most gut-wrenching things I have ever had the privilege of sharing with you. Let's get into it. My name isn't important. What's important is that about 14 months ago, I was a 27-year-old man who genuinely believed he had built something real. A marriage, a family, a home that felt like it meant something. I had a wife named Kara. I had a stepdaughter named Lily, who I had been raising since she was less than a year old. I had a job I was decent at, an apartment that felt like ours, and the kind of quiet daily routine that most people, when they're honest with themselves, actually want. I didn't have everything figured out. Nobody does at 27. But I thought I knew the important stuff. I thought I knew my wife. I didn't know anything. Let me give you some background because context matters in a story like this one. Kara and I met when I was 20. She was 21. She was funny and a little complicated, and I fell for her faster than I probably should have. She had a 10-month-old daughter, Lily, from a relationship that had already ended before I came into the picture. Lily's biological father had been located, served a paternity order, established legally as the father, and then more or less vanished. He'd reached out once in the 4 years since. That was it. I want to be honest about something here. When I found out Kara had a baby, I thought about it. I sat with it for a while. Some people would have walked. I didn't, not because I was trying to be noble. I genuinely loved Kara, and when I met Lily, I felt something shift in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet, but recognized later as exactly what it was. I was in. I wanted to be her dad, not a stepfather in the distant formal sense of the word, her actual dad, the one who showed up, so that's what I did. For years, we moved in together after about a year of dating. I adjusted my work schedule to cover school pickups and sick days. I was there for the stomach bugs and the nightmares and the first loose tooth and the first day of kindergarten. I was there for all of it. Kara worked. I worked. We built something together. We got married 18 months before all of this happened. Small wedding, backyard, family on both sides. Lily was the flower girl, and she wore a yellow dress and took the whole thing extremely seriously. That's the life I thought I was living. Now let me tell you about Kara's family. She was never particularly close with most of them. There was always this particular coolness at family gatherings. Polished surface, not much underneath. Extended family dinners felt like business meetings where nobody had agreed on the agenda. I never fully understood it, but I didn't press. Some families are just like that. There were exceptions, though. A few cousins she'd grown up near, kids she'd actually played with, people who felt like real family rather than obligatory ones. The most significant of these was a man I'll call Daniel. Daniel was one of those naturally magnetic people. Easy to like, easy to talk to, the kind of guy who made you feel like you'd known him for years after one conversation. He remembered things, your kid's name, your job title, the name of the town you grew up in. He asked follow-up questions. He was funny without trying too hard. When I first met him at a family event a few years before all of this, I genuinely liked him. I thought, this is one of the good ones in this otherwise stiff, distant family. His wife, Renata, was quieter, warm but guarded. She and Daniel had been living interstate for a while and had moved back to the area about a year before Kara and I got married. They had a young son, maybe 3 years old at the time, and Renata was pregnant with their second when everything in this story happened. Now, here's something Kara told me early in our relationship. Something she mentioned casually, almost like an aside, like it barely warranted discussion. She said that when she and Daniel were teenagers, around 15 or 16, there had been a moment at a family gathering where he had tried to kiss her. She pulled away. They never talked about it afterward. She never told any adult. She said she'd always figured it was just one of those stupid, awkward teenage moments, that he was young, it meant nothing, and that was the end of it. I believed her. I had zero reason not to. I'd met Daniel. He seemed completely normal. He was married with kids. It had been over a decade. I filed it away under things that happened before I existed and moved on. That was, I now understand, the first mistake. For the first couple of years of our marriage, everything was fine. Normal fine, not perfect fine. Kara went through periods of anxiety that made her withdrawn. I worked long hours. We were both tired a lot of the time. Our sex life had its seasons, some better than others. We didn't fight much. That was always one of the things I felt good about. We could talk things through. We were a good team. Lily was thriving. About a year and a half into the marriage, Daniel and Renata showed up at a family birthday party. This was the first time I'd seen them in maybe 8 months. They seemed fine, normal. Daniel was his usual easy, charming self. We talked about baseball for a while. I remember thinking he was one of the few people in Kara's family I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. That winter, a few family events happened. A Christmas gathering, a cousin's engagement party. Kara attended both with Daniel, since we only had one car at the time and I needed it for work. She sent photos. Group shots, big tables, nothing unusual. She came home from both of them a little quiet, which I attributed to the anxiety stuff. I'd learned not to push when she went into those quiet spells. I made tea and gave her space and figured it would pass. Then one evening, out of nowhere, she brought up a woman from my office who had recently followed me on social media. She mentioned it lightly, almost in passing, not quite accusing but not quite joking either. Something in her tone caught my attention. In 5+ years together, Kara had never once shown that kind of insecurity. She was confident, self-contained, not prone to jealousy. This was so out of character that it snagged in my brain even though I didn't know why. I didn't know yet that cheaters sometimes project. I've since learned that's a very well-documented thing. Now here is where the story actually starts. It was a Thursday afternoon. Kara was at work. Lily was at school. I was home for the day. I'd had a late meeting cancel and come home early to get ahead on some paperwork. I sat down at our laptop, the shared family laptop we both used occasionally, to pull up a work document. I noticed that Kara's email account was still open in the browser. I want to be clear about this. I was not looking for anything. I had no real plan to snoop. I was going to close the tab. I wasn't at that point suspicious enough to deliberately go looking for evidence of something I only vaguely felt wrong about. But a new message had just arrived in her inbox, and the subject line stopped me. Thinking about you all morning. The sender was Daniel. I sat there for a moment. I told myself there was probably an innocent explanation. Cousins can have warm relationships. Maybe it was an inside joke. Maybe he was being affectionate the way some families are. I opened the email, one paragraph. Warm in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with cousins. Referencing something they'd clearly discussed recently. Something private, something I wasn't part of. Asking when he could see her next. Saying he'd been replaying something in his head. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical. I went back through the inbox. I told myself I was going to find context that made this make sense. I didn't find any. There were close to 30 emails in recent months alone. Some were brief, almost coded, logistic, careful. Others were longer and more open. In all of them, the dynamic was unmistakable. Daniel was pushing something forward. Kara was responding in a way that was warm, engaged, reciprocal, not aggressive, not passionate in an obvious way, but there, present. She used her marriage occasionally as a reason to slow things down, but never as a reason to stop entirely. She was not shutting it down. She was tending to it. Nothing in those emails spelled out a physical affair in explicit terms. But nothing in those emails was remotely consistent with two cousins who were just close. I closed the laptop, I went outside and sat in my own car in my own driveway and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Maybe 45 minutes. I don't know exactly. My hands were shaking and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. When Kara got home that evening, I waited until after dinner. I waited until Lily was in bed and the apartment was quiet. I sat down across from Kara at the kitchen table and I told her, calmly, that I had seen the emails. She didn't react with anger. I think I expected anger, defensiveness, denial, immediate pushback. Instead, she went quiet, and then she started crying. Not loud crying. Quiet, controlled, almost graceful. The kind of crying that later I'd realize was practiced. She said she didn't know how to make it stop. That she'd been hoping it would just fade on its own. That she knew she should have told me. She said it was nothing. That Daniel had gotten too familiar and she hadn't handled it correctly. that she was sorry. I wanted to believe her. I genuinely did. A part of me reached for that version of things the way you reach for a handrail in the dark. Because it was there, and because I needed something to hold on to. But there was something in how she said it. The words were right, but the delivery was slightly off, like someone performing a feeling rather than having one. She was composed in a way that didn't quite match the gravity of what we were discussing. Remorseful on the surface, but not hollowed out, not genuinely gutted. And I had known this woman for 6 years. I knew what she looked like when something actually broke her. This wasn't it. I asked her if I could contact Daniel directly and tell him to stop. She hesitated, said she'd rather handle it herself, that it would create less drama if it came from her. I told her I wasn't comfortable sitting on this while she managed the timeline. She pushed back gently. We went back and forth. Eventually, she agreed. She would tell him that I knew that it needed to stop and that he should not contact her again. I didn't wait for her to follow through. That same night, I sent Daniel a message myself. I kept it brief. I told him I was aware of what had been going on, that it needed to end immediately, and that if he contacted my wife again, we were going to have a very different conversation. He read it. He never replied. 3 days later, I came home to find Kara visibly upset. Not the composed, tearful version from the kitchen table conversation. This was something rawer. Red eyes, distracted, moving around the apartment with this restless, agitated energy. I asked what was wrong. She said she'd tried to reach Daniel, and he wasn't responding to her. I need you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. My wife had just watched me confront a man for having an inappropriate relationship with her. And now she was upset, genuinely upset, visibly distressed, because that man was no longer responding to her messages. I kept my voice level. I asked why she had reached out to him. She said she wanted to apologize for how things had ended, that she felt bad about the way it had all come out, and didn't want things to be awkward at family events. Apologize for how things had ended. I nodded. I didn't say what I was thinking. I made dinner. I put Lily to bed. I lay awake until almost 4 in the morning. 2 nights after that, I was up late working at my desk. I heard her voice from the bedroom, quiet, low, punctuated by small laughs. I got up and walked down the hallway. By the time I opened the bedroom door, she had already put her phone face down on the nightstand. She said she'd been on the phone with her sister. Something about Lily's upcoming birthday. I said okay. I went back to my desk. I want to tell you that I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I don't snoop. I don't check phones. I was not, before all of this, someone who needed to verify where his wife was or what she was doing. The reason I'm telling you this is because I want you to understand what it felt like to suddenly become that person, to feel the gears of your own brain shift into a mode you'd never used before. The mode where you start quietly watching, collecting, noting small inconsistencies, not because you want to, because something in your gut has already figured out what your conscious mind is still refusing to accept. I was playing dumb, not because I had a strategy, because I didn't know what else to do. The confirmation came on a Sunday morning. Lily was at her grandmother's for the weekend. Kara was at a yoga class, or so she said. I sat down at the laptop again with my coffee. The email tab was open again. This time I searched deliberately. I found a subfolder. Organized, labeled, hidden in plain sight, inside her own account. She had apparently been careful about the inbox itself, but had created this folder thinking, I suppose, that nobody would go looking inside the folder structure. The emails inside went back 4 years. Let me say that again so it lands properly. 4 years. I had been with Kara for 6 years total. We had been together for 2 years before I found the first email in that subfolder, which means that almost the entire time I had known this woman, almost the entire time I had been Lily's dad, almost the entirety of our relationship, this had been happening. I'm not going to walk you through every email. Partly because some of it is still something I'm processing, and partly because the specifics matter less than the shape of what I found. Here's the shape of it. The emails made clear that this was not a situation that had gotten complicated. This was a sustained, deliberate, ongoing affair between a woman and her own cousin. There were references to meetings I now recognized, family events I'd attended where I'd smiled and shook Daniel's hand and brought a casserole. A weekend Kara had told me was a trip with friends from work, a supposed work conference. There were conversations in those emails where Daniel asked specific questions about my schedule, where Kara described our home life with the clinical detachment of someone doing reconnaissance. I had been the cover story, not just recently, not just since things had gotten complicated. From almost the very beginning, I was the normal-looking husband, the stable income, the reliable presence. I was the reason the whole arrangement had a surface that could be shown to the world. I raised her daughter. I rearranged my career around school pickup times. I was there at 3 in the morning when Lily had a fever, and I was doing all of that while Kara was conducting a years-long affair with her own blood relative and using our marriage as the thing that made it possible. I didn't confront her that day. I couldn't. I was not in a state to have that conversation in any productive way. I forwarded every email to a personal account. I printed what I could. I closed the laptop and I called my older brother and I asked him to come over without explaining why. He was there within the hour. He took one look at me and didn't ask questions. We sat on my front steps and I told him everything. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said, "What do you need right now?" I said I needed to not be alone and I needed someone to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. He stayed until midnight. The next morning, I drove to Renata's house. I know some people will say that was the wrong move, that I should have confronted Kara first, that I should have waited, gathered more, thought it through. Maybe. But here's what I knew. Renata was pregnant. She was building a life. She was going to her prenatal appointments and picking out baby names and doing all the things a woman does when she believes her marriage is real. And her husband was not who she thought he was. If I had been in her position, I would have wanted someone to tell me. That was the only math I needed to do. I knocked on her door with a folder of printed emails. Renata answered. She looked at me, then at the folder, and something shifted in her expression before I said a word. Like some part of her had been waiting for exactly this. She let me in. She read everything slowly. She didn't rush. She sat at her kitchen table with the folder open in front of her, and she went through each page the way you go through a legal document. Carefully, thoroughly, making sure she understood every word. When she finished, she set the papers down and was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "How long have you known?" I told her everything. About the first email I'd stumbled on, the conversation with Kara, the 3 days of watching and collecting, and then what I'd found in the subfolder that morning. Renata nodded slowly. She told me that Daniel had been different recently. Distant, sometimes irritable for no reason. She'd attributed it to work stress. She'd been worried about him. Actually, she'd thought maybe he was depressed or anxious about the new baby. We talked for 2.5 hours. She cried. I cried, which surprised me. Her mother arrived partway through, and I told her too, because there was no point stopping at that stage. When I finally left, Renata had already texted a lawyer she knew and was in the process of calling her sister. I drove home. Kara was awake when I got in, sitting in the living room in the dark, which she almost never did. She'd clearly been waiting. I sat down across from her. I told her I had been to see Renata. What happened next was not what I expected. I expected guilt. I expected breakdown. I expected some version of the composed crying from the kitchen table, maybe more intense this time. Instead, I got fury. She was angry, genuinely hotly angry, at me, for going to Renata, for not coming to her first, for, as she kept putting it, involving people who didn't need to be involved, for making a private situation into a public one, for not giving her the chance to handle things, the chance to handle things. I remember sitting there thinking, she still believes there's a version of this she can manage. Even now, with a folder of evidence on the table between us, some part of her brain was still in management mode, still calculating, still looking for the angle. I didn't argue. I put the printed emails on the table. I watched her look at them, watched her face as she recognized what she was seeing, watched Blatt's management calculations slowly fail. She started crying, different from before, deeper, more genuine. Less controlled, she said. It started so long ago I don't even remember what it was like before it was happening. I moved into a hotel that night. I called my doctor's office first thing in the morning. If you've followed this kind of story before, you'll understand why without me spelling it out. Some of the things I'd found in those emails made certain medical appointments necessary. Waiting for those kinds of test results is a specific kind of slow dread that I wouldn't wish on anyone. My boss, when I told him I needed time, without giving him all the details, just enough, said to take whatever I needed. He's been through a difficult divorce himself. He told me he'd handle things on his end and not to worry. That kind of uncomplicated human decency means more than people realize when you're in the middle of something like this. My brother, my parents, my closest friends, all of them showed up, not in an overwhelming way, in a quiet, steady, we're here way that I'll be grateful for the rest of my life. Now let me tell you about the part of this story that I didn't see coming. When I'd gone to Renata that morning, I'd expected to deliver information and then exit. I hadn't expected to find someone who was, in a very specific and strange way, going through the exact same thing I was going through. We'd been betrayed by the same two people. Our lives had been built on the same lie. We were, in the most unexpected possible way, the two people in the world who most understood what the other was experiencing. We started talking. Not romantically, that wasn't it. Not at first. Just talking. Exchanging information at first. Practically. Each of us had pieces the other didn't have, and we were both trying to understand the full scope of what had happened. She had discovered some things on her own after I'd left. Old messages on an ancient social media platform that neither of us had thought about in years. Evidence that the relationship between Kara and Daniel had started much earlier than either of us had realized. Earlier than he'd ever told Renata. Earlier, in fact, than what Kara had originally disclosed to me as a one-time awkward teenage moment. It hadn't been a one-time awkward teenage moment. It had never been that, I'll be honest with you. The weeks following the discovery were some of the hardest of my life. Not the anger part. The anger was almost easier, because at least it was directed at something. The hard part was the rewinding. When you discover that someone has been lying to you for years, your brain doesn't just absorb the information and update accordingly. It goes back. It replays everything. Every family gathering where I shook Daniel's hand. Every evening, Kara came home from a family event looking tired. Every weekend trip. Every moment where she seemed distant, and I told myself it was anxiety. Every time Lily called me dad and I felt that uncomplicated warmth, I had to sit with the knowledge that even the most real part of my life, had been built on a foundation of something rotten. I had been the placeholder, the respectable cover, the man who made the whole thing look normal. I started therapy, not the twice and done kind, real, consistent, weekly therapy with someone I trusted. My therapist helped me start to understand something that I'd been circling without being able to name. I had spent years confusing the absence of conflict with the presence of happiness. Kara and I didn't fight. We were a good team. We communicated well about practical things. I had taken all of that to mean we were okay. I hadn't understood that you could have all of those surface-level indicators of a working relationship while something underneath was fundamentally hollow. I know that now. I know it in a way that will probably always affect how I approach relationships. Renata and I kept meeting. Sometimes to exchange information for the divorce proceedings. Sometimes just to talk. She was going through her own version of the rewinding. The retroactive reassessment of every moment in her marriage. Every time Daniel had been distant or defensive. Everything that hadn't quite added up. She was also, I should say, incredibly strong. She had a young child and was pregnant, and her entire world had just inverted, and she was handling it with this quiet, grounded kind of resilience that I found genuinely remarkable. At some point, something shifted between us. I'm not going to dress it up or make it more romantic than it was in its origins. We were two people in an enormous amount of pain who had found the one other person who completely understood that pain. We were spending a lot of time together. We were honest with each other in a way that's only possible when you've both already seen the worst and there's nothing left to protect. At some point, spending time with her became the best part of my day, and I didn't know what to do with that. I want to be real with you about something, because this channel is about honesty. When I started developing feelings for Renata, my first reaction was not excitement. My first reaction was a kind of exhausted, resigned internal groan, like, of course this is happening. Of course my life is going to get more complicated. At the exact moment I was starting to get a handle on it. Some of the people I'd told about the situation told me it was too soon, that I was in the middle of trauma and I was going to make it worse, that a relationship built on shared damage was not a foundation you could build anything lasting on. They weren't wrong to raise those concerns. I raised them myself, internally, many times. Renata did too, but here's what I also knew. She was the first person I had been around in years with whom I felt like I didn't have to manage anything. I wasn't monitoring my tone. I wasn't adjusting my behavior. I wasn't smoothing anything over. I was just present. And so was she. We agreed to go slowly. We agreed to keep it quiet while the divorces were processing. We agreed to be honest with each other if at any point it felt like we were making a mistake. Daniel disappeared from the picture for a while. And then, about 6 weeks after everything came out, something happened. He was hospitalized. The full details were unclear initially. There were conflicting accounts from different family members, and I won't claim to know exactly what happened. What I was told was that he had ingested something dangerous and was in serious condition. I'll be honest about what I felt when I heard that. It wasn't pity. It wasn't satisfaction. What I felt was a kind of overwhelming, bone-deep tiredness. Like this story had taken every form of dramatic turn possible and was now determined to take one more. Like I had been living inside someone else's chaos for months, and it was never going to be finished. He survived. The recovery was long and difficult. I won't speak more about that because it's not my story to tell fully. What I will tell you is that Renata handled the entire situation with more grace than anyone in her position could have been expected to. She had more reason than most people ever will to be bitter, and she mostly wasn't. She focused on her children and her own recovery. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Kara and I went through the process without lawyers. We didn't have enough assets to make that worth the expense. We divided things practically. We had an agreement about Lily that I'll get to in a moment. When we had our final extended conversation, the one where she told me the version of the truth she'd apparently decided I was owed. She told me things I hadn't known, that she had been unhappy in our marriage for a long time, not resentful of me, she said. Not that she hated me, just that something essential had not been there and hadn't been for a while. She said she'd stayed because of Lily, because of stability, because in every practical sense we were a good team. She also told me something that hit harder than almost anything else. There had been a week, about 2 years into our marriage, when she had cried for days. I remembered it. I'd held her through it. I'd assumed it was the anxiety. I'd made her soup and brought her tea and rubbed her back and told her I loved her. She told me she'd been crying because she'd just found out that someone she cared about was pregnant. And it wasn't a happy thing. It was complicated, painful, connected to the other part of her life that I didn't know existed. I had spent 2 days comforting my wife through grief about another man. I didn't have a response to that. I still don't really have one. The hardest part of this whole story is not what happened with Kara. It's not the betrayal, the years of lies, the cover story, any of it. The hardest part is Lily. She was 6 years old when her family, as she knew it, ended. She didn't understand, say, she understood that things had changed, that I lived somewhere different now, that her parents weren't together anymore. She knew I still loved her. I made sure of that every single time I saw her. After the divorce proceedings started, Kara had agreed to let me stay in Lily's life. We had a verbal arrangement about weekend visits. I took Lily to the zoo. We played video games together. She called me Dad, and I answered to it without hesitation. And then Kara found out about Renata and me. Within 2 weeks, the visits became irregular, then sparse. The excuses got more elaborate. I'd call to confirm a pickup and something would come up. Lily would be sick. There'd be a family thing. The schedule had changed. I want to be clear that I never had legal standing to fight this. Lily was not my biological daughter. I had no paperwork, no formal custody arrangement. I was, in the eyes of the legal system, nothing, just a man who had shown up every day for 6 years and loved a child who had no technical claim on me. I won't tell you I handled that with perfect equanimity. I didn't. I spent a few weeks trying to make the informal arrangement work anyway, fighting through the excuses, showing up anyway. Lily and I went apple picking one Saturday that I'll carry with me for a long time. She talked about Minecraft the whole car ride and showed me a drawing she'd made at school of a house with a red roof, and she told me the red roof was because red was my favorite color. I don't know how she remembered that. I told her she was right, and then I had a very difficult, very long conversation with myself. I am not someone who gives up on people. That is, I think, a genuinely true thing about who I am. But I had to be honest about what remaining in Lily's life on Kara's terms was actually going to look like. It was going to mean years of being managed, years of being used as a lever when it suited her and kept away when it didn't. Years of Lily watching her two parents navigate something ugly and complicated, with me having no legal recourse and no stable ground to stand on. I had to ask myself whether staying under those conditions was actually good for Lily, or whether it was good for me, for my own need to remain the dad I'd decided to be, in a way that didn't necessarily put her first. I don't know if I made the right decision. I genuinely don't. It's the thing I'm still working through in therapy. What I know is that I talked to Lily directly, in a way that was honest but gentle and appropriate for a 6-year-old, and I told her that I loved her and that some things were changing, but that would never change. I made sure she heard that. I made sure she heard it from me in my own voice, and then I stepped back. It was the worst feeling I have ever had in my life, including everything else in this story, everything else combined. 3 months after everything had started, here is where things stood. I was living in my original apartment. Kara had moved out and gone to her parents, and my landlord had been glad to keep me on given how difficult vacancy had gotten. Renata and I were together, quietly, not broadcasting it, not making any big announcements. Just two people trying to figure out what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like, building something carefully in the middle of all the wreckage. My test results had come back clean. I'm going to be honest and tell you that I sat in the parking lot of the clinic afterward and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry about any of the rest of it. 6 weeks of quiet dread released all at once. Renata's situation was complicated by the response of Daniel's family. While he had been gone, first disappeared, then in the hospital, his parents had been supportive of her, allowing her to stay in the property they owned, condemning his behavior, acting, essentially, as though she was their daughter and he had been the problem. After he was hospitalized, that shifted. Grief does strange things to people. His parents began looking for somewhere to direct the weight of everything that had happened, and found, somehow, a way to redirect it toward the woman who had been cheated on. They blamed Renata for how publicly the affair had been exposed. They blamed her for his subsequent disappearance. They implied, and eventually said outright, that if she had handled things differently, privately, he might have been okay. I want to note, for anyone who has ever been told something similar, that is not how any of this works. The person who commits an act is responsible for the consequences of that act, not the person who tells the truth about it. The pressure on Renata from Daniel's family reached a point where staying in that property was no longer tenable. I offered her a place to stay. She and her daughter moved in. Living together was, I don't have a more eloquent word for this, good. Genuinely, surprisingly, consistently good, not easy. There were hard conversations. There were moments when the weight of everything caught up with both of us at the same time, and we had to figure out how to hold space for each other without losing our own footing. There were nights when one of us woke up from something and couldn't sleep, and we'd end up at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning just talking. But there was also this consistent, quiet warmth that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. She cooked. I learned to cook alongside her. It became this thing we did together, finding new recipes, comparing results, laughing at the disasters. We talked about our days. We sat down to dinner together like it was a real thing, which it was. I'd been in a marriage for years, and looking back, I'm honestly not sure what Kara and I had in common beyond our practical compatibility. We were a good parenting team. We liked the same movies. We were both artistically inclined. But I can't tell you what our thing was. The specific, private ours thing that long-term couples have. I'm not sure we had one. With Renata, I had it almost immediately. And it was simple stuff. The cooking, a shared taste in music, long walks. Her daughter, who, if you'll allow me a moment of complete softness, is one of the most objectively delightful small humans I have ever encountered in my life. And feeding her dinner and putting her to sleep has done more for my mental health than almost anything else in the past year. I want to give you the final update now. Because there is one. This is being written approximately 1 year after the day I sat down at a laptop to look up a work document and accidentally opened an email that changed everything. Here is where my life stands. Renata and I are together. We've relocated, moved to a new city, a new situation, a new chapter. We're both in individual therapy, and we've done some joint counseling, which I'd recommend to literally any couple, regardless of the circumstances of how they got together. We're building something real. It's not simple and it's not without hard days, but it's ours and it's honest. And I know the difference now between something real and something hollow. My divorce was finalized. The process was quick because there was nothing complicated to divide, and neither of us was trying to drag it out. Just two people who needed to end something and did it as cleanly as possible given the circumstances. I found out through family channels that Kara had been struggling after everything came out. Her role in the affair had become known to more and more of the extended family, the ones who had previously operated on the assumption that Daniel had been the aggressor, that Kara was somehow a victim of something complicated. When that framing collapsed, the family response collapsed with it. She lost relationships she had taken for granted. Some of that was genuinely painful to hear. I didn't take any pleasure in it. I just wanted my own life to move forward. My stepson, Lily, I've been calling her, but this still matters. I have not seen regularly in months. I stay in touch with her grandparents when I can. I think of her constantly. That part has not gotten easier, and I'm not sure it will. My therapist tells me that grief doesn't go away, it just changes shape over time. I'll take that on faith for now. Renata's daughter, who I am not her stepfather, not officially, not yet, but who has very decisively adopted me into her life in the way only toddlers can, without ceremony and without negotiation, is doing well. She is 18 months old and has recently developed an extremely strong opinion about which shoes she wants to wear on any given day. I support this. I think knowing what you want and advocating for it is an excellent trait to develop early. There's one more thing I want to tell you. Near the end of the pregnancy, Renata's pregnancy, the baby they conceived after she and I had gotten together, we had tests done. I won't go into the full medical details, but I'll say this. I have a hereditary condition that I have spent my entire adult life being terrified to pass on. It's the reason I had always assumed biological children weren't part of my future. It's part of why I had embraced the idea of being a step-parent so completely, because I genuinely believed that was as close as I would get. The test results came back. The baby was healthy, no indication of the condition. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon in a clinic waiting room, and I sat there for probably 10 minutes before I was able to drive. Renata held my hand. I didn't have words for any of it. I still don't have words that feel adequate. Our daughter was born healthy. She is here. She is real. She has her mother's eyes, and she screams at an astonishing volume for someone so small, which I understand is developmentally appropriate, but which has not yet stopped being slightly alarming at 3 in the morning. I love her in a way that is different from language. I am her dad. I started this story by telling you that 14 months ago, I was a man who thought he'd figured out love, who thought he was living an honest life with people he knew. Here's what I actually know now. The absence of conflict is not the same as the presence of happiness. The surface of something can look completely intact while everything underneath has been hollow for years. You can be a good person, a present person, an attentive and loving person, and still be living inside a fiction that someone else constructed around you. None of that is a reflection on you. It's a reflection on the people who built the fiction. I wasted time feeling like I should have known, like I should have seen it, like some failure of perception on my part allowed it to happen. My therapist has been very patient in helping me understand that I didn't fail to see it because I was oblivious. I failed to see it because I trusted the person I'd committed my life to, which is not a character flaw. It's what trust is. What I can tell you, 1 year out, is that I'm okay. Not the performed okay that I walked around with for the first few months. Actually okay, in the way that's earned rather than performed. I got there through therapy and honesty, and a lot of very dark, 3 in the morning kitchen table conversations, and the kind of slow, methodical, daily work of building a real life that feels like it belongs to you. If you're in something right now that feels wrong but looks fine, trust what you feel. You don't have to blow everything up to pay attention to the thing that's nagging at you. You just have to be honest with yourself about what you already know. Thank you for watching. This channel exists because these stories matter and because nobody should have to feel alone in the middle of one. If this hit close to home, drop a comment. I read everything. Hi, Family Infidelity and Revenge. Subscribe if you haven't. Like if this story meant something to you. I'll see you in the next one.